Hey everyone, and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show for July 16th, 2020. I'm Avram Pilch, editor-in-chief of Tom's Hardware, and I'm joined, as always, by senior editor Sharon Harding, and this week by senior editor Andrew Friedman. And we've got a very special guest, Alex, the LowSpec Gamer. Has joined us to talk about some things he's working on, particularly this week around Death Stranding and how that plays on a PC. How are you guys doing? Sharon, what's your week been like?
It's been good. I actually reviewed a laptop for the first time in a while, so that was pretty fun for me. Probably even more fun is that it's a Ryzen 4000 PC, which I haven't gotten to test yet at all. It's the Asus TUF Gaming A15. It has a Ryzen 7 4800H with an RTX 2060. It did pretty well in our benchmarks compared to similarly priced machines. This laptop is $1,200 right now. Our review should be up pretty soon, if not, like within the next day or two. And it did pretty well. It's a good competitor for the price and giving other laptops in that range, like the Dell G5 line, a run for its money.
Cool. How about you, Andrew?
So we've got a lot going on in general. On the bench, we have the Lenovo Flex 5G, which is the first 5G laptop to market. We're still testing it, so don't have too much to say about it just yet, though I'm curious to see how that performs with Snapdragon 8CX and Windows 10 Pro on ARM. Recently off of the bench is this little guy.
Oh.
Which well, I know we'll be talking about later during the show.
Aha, a mini PC. And how about you, Alex? What's been going on in your world recently?
So, interestingly enough, in my neck of the woods, a lot of the entry level or mini PC sort of stuff that I tend to follow has been delayed as part of the chain of of hardware and game related delays that have been happening this year. It's starting to pick up right now with Death Stranding, and Ubisoft has announced the release of some of their future games, which are coming soon enough. But around that, I have just been experimenting with some of the things that the community modders have been doing for some older games that I have been ignoring until now. I'm finding some pretty interesting results that I should do videos about very soon.
Wow. So I've also had a laptop I've been reviewing for the first time in a few weeks. I'm showing right here, this is the latest Thinkpad X1 Carbon, which is definitely not made for gaming. But here's the model that because it has Intel integrated graphics, but it is fantastic for productivity, for writing, for getting things done, for coding, because it has such an excellent keyboard. The model I'm showing right here to folks who are watching is the 4K HDR display, which looks better than reality. So I'd actually wish that this had a camera on the outside of it, so I could just walk around looking at stuff through the webcam because the colors are better than the actual world. But besides that, it's a pretty cool laptop, and we have a review of it going up shortly. So speaking of things that are pretty cool and use laptop parts, Andrew, you had the chance to test this week a new mini PC. Some would say a NUC killer from a not so well-known company called Minisforum. Tell us about it.
So this is the Minisforum Desk Mini DMAF5. So it's a real catchy name. And this is actually the rare instance of us reviewing a product that hasn't been sold to the public yet. This is currently in Indiegogo. And there are still early bird models left. This one here is the version with 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabytes of storage, and what all of them come with a Ryzen 5 3550H APU. And those are okay specs. The big thing about that is that the CPU is already a generation old at launch. So if you're really going for the most power, it's a little bit outdated. But if you're going for size, well, it's really small. Now, you were talking about Intel's NUCs. Those do measure a little bit smaller than this, but for me, like, not to a point that I would worry too much about. The thing this really has going for it for me is that to upgrade it, you just put your fingers on both sides and that comes off. Like, that's it. That's the lid, no screws. So you can see here, ours came with 8 gigabytes of RAM. They did it single channel, a little disappointingly, but there is room for more in there. You have the SSD here. Ours came with SATA. While we were testing, they said that they're going to upgrade to NVMe, which is good because the SATA drive was slow as heck. And there is here, there's a SATA connector for if you wanted to put in like a 2.5-inch SSD or hard drive or something like that. The bottom does unscrew. There's just a fan down there, so you don't really need to unscrew it. And then for some of the early Kickstarter backers, it will also come with this little, I'm holding it upside down, this little mini keyboard, which kind of feels like a BlackBerry, like with these scalloped keys here. It's a little smushed, but it uses an accelerometer to be the mouse, so you kind of like use it like a Wii remote. It's like it's a cool little extra. I think most people will want to use their own mice and keyboards unless they're using it as a home theater PC. This thing tested largely okay in benchmarks. The 3550H is fine. It's a shame they couldn't be at launch with Ryzen 4000 because the power efficiency and the performance there is just so much better. That being said, this thing has basically like they're ready for production. They've already cut. This says 1,913% of their flexible goal, still with 39 days left. They have 458 backers right now. So you could still get in on this early, but it looks like they'll be selling it in October if you really want to wait and see how the final product looks.
Huh. Fascinating.
So, Alex, do you think you could play a lot of games on that?
Yeah, actually, no, I have a bunch of questions. You mentioned that
Sure.
model is single channel. Does it have a second slot or is it always single channel?
Yeah. No, so there is, they sold it single channel. There is a second slot, so you could easily swap in your own SODIMMs or put that in there, or even just put another one yourself. So that's pretty easy. For gaming, we tested some games, but I mean, we tested parts of our gaming suite. So we tested Tomb Raider. Grand Theft Auto 5 ran on its lowest possible settings, which was nice. But, Tomb Raider and Borderlands 3 were unplayable even at some of the lowest settings. If you're making an emulation box, now you might be getting somewhere. But, it has Vega graphics inside, but it's not a gaming machine. It's something this small is never a typical gaming machine. I know what LowSpec Alex considers a gaming machine is slightly different than what I consider one to be. But yeah, if you're emulating, you're playing like really classic games, that's probably going to be fine. Otherwise, you're going to have to turn stuff down real low to run on Vega.
Yeah, well, it's obviously I will beg to disagree with some of those arguments, but the part that is interesting to me is like I have seen that people have been calling it a NUC killer, and yes, it is
Right.
a pretty big shame that it's not able to come with the latest generation of AMD.
Right.
But for the longest time, NUCs have been interesting, not just because of emulation, because a huge array of potential uses, but AMD APUs have been improving a lot. And at this point, it was kind of ridiculous that we weren't getting any sort of this mini PCs running on AMD and bigger graphics, especially because like stuff like driver support just tends to be better. There's a lot of bigger games that when you try to run them on Intel HD graphics, you get issues with the drivers. Well, the Vega 3 just uses the same AMD drivers, which tends to work just better. And I haven't tested that specific CPU on laptops before, but it depending. Okay, so here's the thing: if you test it with the mindset of trying to achieve like 1080p, that is usually doesn't work very well. But from what I have tested, a lot of the games that have a resolution scaler, so you can run it at 70% resolution or 50% resolution, you will be surprised how much people will consider that acceptable. And I will not be surprised if there's a wider range of 3D games that will work in something like that. And also important to consider that there's.
I was just going to say, our testing was 1080p and also 720p. We wanted to give it a real chance, so yeah.
Okay, but even beyond that, there's a variety of games which are usually the sort of things that you will see people playing on the Nintendo Switch. Stuff like
Right.
Stardew Valley, stuff like what's
Oh, that'll run
there's
fine.
yeah, no, there's a ton, particularly of the sort of indie games that I like to play, that I will imagine something under the like under my TV. I have a box with a 3200G, but that's like a
Right.
desktop chip, so it has a higher
Yeah.
range. But even with that, there's I'm excited. I'm hopefully sort of crossing my fingers that this sort of initiative. Well, it seems that they're already being successful in Indiegogo, and I'm crossing my fingers, hoping that it actually sells to impulse more people to do it, because I would like to see more competition in that sort of APU space for mini PCs, because I think there's a lot of things worth exploring there.
And that's the interesting thing with this, is that the first one we're really seeing is it's an Indiegogo campaign. It's not from Lenovo or Gigabyte or HP or like a major OEM. It's from Minisforum and it's on Indiegogo. So I mean, I guess that explains why you get something like the third generation APU. And the other thing I find interesting is actually how much people are talking about it in terms of gaming, because I think I'm the rare person who's seen a NUC in the wild before. Oftentimes you see a NUC and it's in people's homes. These mini PCs are often for digital signage, or they're for, and this comes with a Visa mount. You can put it on the back of a monitor. Maybe you have it in the mall, and if you go to, whenever we go back to malls, and it's, saying where the stores are, when the flights are. Or you might see it, I've seen them in doctors' offices before, where like space is really a premium and they have mobile desks. And that's where I've seen things like NUCs before. Where I'm seeing interest in this is more from the enthusiast community. I don't think, a lot of more industrial buyers don't know who Minisforum is. So it's just interesting to see, okay, this is where really a lot of hobbyists are going, okay, this is a new form factor, and AMD is the new hotness right now, and I want to give that a shot.
AMD is not the new hotness; they're the 50-year-old hotness.
50-year-old. Yeah, and so
30, that's young.
Yes, as
so
people might think.
Yeah.
So Sharon, would you get excited about using a mini PC like this?
Well, maybe not that specific one, because as Andrew said, the frame rates were, can I say crappy?
I mean, it depends.
Yeah, for the games that I would want to play, which would include like Borderlands and games like that, no. And also, I'm not going to buy a system off Indiegogo. I'm just not going to do that with my money quite yet. But that said, I would like to see more mini PCs. I think it's an untapped market, and Andrew just talked about the enthusiasts that are already behind it. But I actually think there's even space for like mainstream users that have. Obviously, many are moving away from desktops to laptops because of the portability, but also desktop towers are really bulky and big. And I see a lot of people who are willing to have a desktop setup with a keyboard and mouse and monitor, but they attach that all to a laptop. So I think there's space for many PCs that are pre-built. We all know how hard it is to build a mini ITX PC, especially Andrew, who built our baby not too long ago and dealing with the cable management and all that. So I think there's a cute market for cute PCs that are small and don't take up a lot of desk space and that come ready to go for people who aren't builders or don't want to deal with tiny PC cases.
And as much as we talk about gaming for that's the real market for this, is to fit on a computer. I mean, it's to fit on a desk next to a monitor and not take a lot of space. And that's been the case for Intel's NUC. And you're not going to get something with an RTX 2080 in here. You're not going to get a discrete graphics card in here, period. Just like, it's not going to happen. The other thing I just want to tell you about real quick, because I realized I didn't mention it, is pricing. Now, a lot of the pricing's in Hong Kong dollars, so I'm just going to kind of give you approximates. So this version here, which is the Ryzen 5, which all of them have 256, 8 gigabytes, is going for $429, which is cheaper than like the closest NUC I was able to find. If you want to get an early bird, which is their Indiegogo terms for like being an early supporter, that's $429. You want 128 gigabytes of storage, it'll bring you down to that is also $429 all the time. 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage is $549 or $529 for early backers. I'm a little bit curious to see if it's going to change at all before it ships again. I mean, I'm always a little skeptical of campaigns like this. You know, you hear of the ones that never come out. In this case, look. I have a unit here. It feels real. It works. I've tried it. There's real packaging. But they did change the drive, right? They are saying Indiegogo supporters will get NVMe, and we got SATA. So we'll see how it changes between now and October. But a lot of people are excited, and I'm curious to see what happens when a bunch of enthusiasts get it in their hands.
Yep. I mean, I think it's interesting that you're seeing PCs get smaller. I still don't totally get, like, I love NUCs, they're cute, but then, you know, you start to use it and you're like, well, wait, have a laptop chip in here. It's not very, I'm not really getting great advantage for having something that's not mobile. And it's not really cheaper than getting a laptop usually with a similar configured laptop.
I don't know. I mean, this is like being like $400 to $500. Like, I mean, granted, you have to get a display and stuff yourself.
Yeah.
But with a laptop you would get for $500 is not very good.
Not terrible. The NUC is like usually way overpriced because you've got to buy it and then you got to bring your own storage and memory.
So this is not sold as a bare bones kit, while the NUC comes either as a bare bones kit or pre-built. So you can still adjust it just as easily as a bare bones kit, but like it will come with your OS and your RAM and your storage.
Yeah.
How is the build quality, Andrew, considering it's tiny and also crowdfunded?
Sure. I mean, so this company's actually made mini PCs before. They're not a huge name, but it exists. It feels pretty solid. I mean, this is metal here around the sides. You got your plastic down here, which is often the case with cooling. And like it largely feels like pretty nice. They clearly have like an actual factory doing these. So I would say like I would trust the build quality on this. I don't think it's going to fall apart. The keyboard, on the other hand, not as much. Like occasionally moving it, I've felt like parts sliding around inside. So the keyboard maybe not so much, but the actual computer itself feels fine.
Great. So talking about other new products that are surprising and smaller than we normally see, Sharon, this week Razer came out with what for them is unique keyboard. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so I thought I was going to have the smallest keyboard on today's show, but Andrew had proved me. So this week, Razer, they announced a new keyboard. It's their first 60% keyboard, so it's a pretty big launch for them. Pun. It's a pretty big launch for them for a couple of reasons. So it's their first 60% keyboard. Obviously, you can tell there's a lot of keys missing compared to your full-size keyboard. So that makes this a pretty niche market. Gamers like to use it sometimes because you get more space to move your mouse around and such. But it's a kind of keyboard that we're not seeing a lot of mainstream gaming vendors make right now. HyperX released one recently, but that keyboard is essentially a ducky keyboard with some like HyperX twists. This is Razer's own design through and through. It's also called the Huntsman Mini, which I don't think I mentioned. So that's one reason why this is interesting. Another reason why is we're seeing Razer double down on its optical mechanical switch technology. So for those who don't know, here's how optical switches work. So each press of the key sends the stem through a beam of light, essentially. And when it crosses through that light, that's when the actuation happens, whereas a traditional mechanical switch would use metallic contact for actuation. So this is Razer's fourth keyboard with optical switches. And on top of that, they're releasing a new switch through this keyboard in August. So they're revamping their linear optical switch that already exists and making it quieter, which is what you want from a linear switch, a quieter experience than the clicky switch that I have here. So Razer's making more of these optical switches. We'll see how that fares in August. But what I have here is the version that's available now with the purple clicky optical switches, and you can hear that sound. And also to mention, this is not how the keyboard comes. It comes in either all black or all white. But Razer's also making PBT keycaps now, which is actually one of the things I like best about this keyboard is how the keycaps complemented the premium feel of the switches. It's textured, it's thicker, it's just better feeling all around. So I switched out the keycaps with a bunch of Razer's keycaps. You can see all 4 colors they offer here. And then I also put in a Dougie spacebar just because it's cute. And so I don't know if you guys have tried Razer's purple switches. The best comparison I can make actually is Kale box switches, which I know Abram loves. So if you haven't tried these yet, Abram, you should try them.
Abram, you are muted. Yeah.
I haven't tried those yet, but I have tried Razer Purple, and Razer Purple are really good.
These are the purple ones, yeah. So
yeah,
the linear ones will come out in August.
Yes. No, I don't like quiet in my keyboards. I want my keyboard to be loud. It's like someone who drives like a motorcycle and they're just revving it. I want my keyboard to be like super loud. What is your keyboard of choice these days, Alex?
Oof, that's a longer question. So I used, what's this wood? I'm not entirely sure what's the model that I'm using, but we use red silent switches here in the office. So I just found whatever had the most affordable silent switches, specifically red silent switches. But at home, I'm actually using, and this is actually part of an interesting conversation. I just started using a 60% keyboard, and it's at home at least. And I find it interesting. I didn't know that Razer had not released a 60% sort of mechanical keyboard before. Because they're tricky to use, and they have for people who have small desks, for people who have very minimalist setups and try to optimize the space as much as possible, which tends to be anyone living in a small apartment in a large city. They tend to be a great blessing. And I use something called a Royal Clutch K61, which is relatively, I think they're a newcomer to the scene, but they're a Chinese brand. Using just regular red switches, or at least a copy of the red switches, which is excellent just feeling. But optical switches, I have tried optical switches before. I don't think there's anyone who has started making any sort of like low, more affordable version of those. But yeah, those have a very particular feel to it. I do wonder what sort of why Razer seems so interested in investing specifically in those. Is it a matter of tactical preference, or is there like something else that pushes a certain their specific sort of gaming customers into that sort of keyboard? Any clues on that?
Well, for one, their optical switches generally have shorter travel than traditional switches. So, for example, these clicky ones have 3.5 millimeters total travel. A blue clicky switch from Cherry has 4 millimeters, and also these switches actuate at a quicker point. So the actuation point for this keyboard is 1 millimeter versus 2.2 millimeters for blue or 1.8 millimeters for white. So it's a tiny, tiny difference. If you're a really elite gamer, you might, swear that you could tell the difference. So that's one reason. Another reason is Razer, when I spoke to Razer about this keyboard, one of the reasons they mentioned for entering the optical mechanical switch space in general is they just felt like mechanical switches were limited in the technology in terms of how far they could advance it and tweak it and just kind of bring something new to the table for gamers. So that's why they decided to kind of branch into this type of switch. But as in terms of whether or not you can really tell the difference, that's going to be debatable. I can't notice such a shorter travel when I compare this to a Kale Box White. Again, that difference is only 0.8 millimeters in terms of the actuation point. So you'd have to be pretty elite of a gamer to notice the difference. But it definitely feels fantastic. Smooth, clicky, great experience.
Well, with keyboards, it's always a matter of preference, right? Of what's the sort of feeling when you're writing that you sort of that actually works for you. Is there any info on how much this retails for?
Yeah. So this one, well, it won't have all the cool keycaps, but it's $120, and the linear version that's coming out in August is $130. Which kind of makes me sad. I know it's only $10, but to pay $10 extra for a revamped switch, that's pretty much just adjusting an issue that shouldn't have been there in the first place, which is it was a loud linear switch. That doesn't make me too excited, but so 120 to 130 depending on what switch you want.
Why would you pay more money for less clicks?
Because people have preferences, man. Some people like them quiet.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, girl.
I do have a question for you, Alex, though. How are you living? Like, we've talked about this on the show before, and we haven't actually had anyone on who uses and likes 60% keyboards. How are you living with it? Like, what not having arrow keys and missing out on some important keys.
Well, it takes a little bit of getting used to, which is specifically why I have it at home and why here in the office I have a full-size keyboard. But the first week of trying it, it's a bit of a nightmare because you already have years, almost decades of just muscle memory of how to use a keyboard, and suddenly you have to remap your brain. But after some use of it, just your brain gets used to it. And it becomes easier, but it's definitely an acquired taste. When I originally got it, and this was something that I got for a video that I don't think I have released yet, I didn't see the point of it, but after using it for a while, I'm more especially seeing how it fits my desk. Because once again, this is, to me, something that fits a very specific use case, very specific minimalist setups. And I know I have friends that are very into minimalistic setups, or people with very small desks, which is my case back home. And it takes practice, and it's definitely a niche market, but it does have a sense to its madness.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. Like, I'm in a small apartment, and I have a small desk. I'm using a full-size keyboard, and that's because I use Excel a lot to make our charts. So it's really, it's really important to have those number keys. But before that, I was using a 10 keyless keyboard, and right about now, I kind of wish I still was. So I could easily see trying to adapt to something like this, especially because I review laptops for a living, and no two keyboards are the same. So my muscle memory is that every keyboard is wrong.
One thing Razer does do with this keyboard to make it a little bit easier to deal with the lack of buttons. So let's see if I could make this visible. But so you have to do a lot of functions, like the arrow keys do the function, and when you hold down the function key, it highlights the relevant keys. So that's kind of helps
nice
with the adjustment.
That is actually pretty neat.
Yeah. Well, I'm still waiting for some company to go the complete opposite way and give me more keys. We're not seeing one of them.
Extra large keyboard, just like two keyboards duct taped to each other.
Buy like one for businesses. I've seen they sell those, like those giant ones. I mean, I don't know what that's going to cost you, but
they don't really there's not a lot that are still made like that. You kind of have to get them used, as far as I'm seeing, in terms of terminal keyboards that have extra function rows, that things that were used maybe 10, 20 years ago on the stock trading floor or something.
Yeah.
But then you have to put in your own way of desoldering switches and putting in your own switches, and they don't have a Windows key. So
the closest thing you might come to at this point is like the Elgato Stream Deck, which is really used more primarily by streamers, but you could program individual buttons to do whatever you want them to do.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I've seen that comes the closest, but not close enough, is there's a company called Unicomp that has the license to make old IBM keyboards as new. They make new ones, and they make 122 key terminal keyboards new, but no Windows key on those, and their switches, which are good, but I might want something different. So speaking of something different that's coming out this week, Death Stranding is on PC, and Alex, you've been using that. You've been working with it. How is that playing on PC, and what do you need to play it?
So Death Stranding is an interesting case because even before it came out, there's a trend of games that came first to console and when they're ported to PC, that they tend to be either way more closed, or just have certain performance issues when they come out that are just an artifact of their origin as a console-specific title. And this is something historically that we have seen in PC gaming very often. I was happy to discover, or for one side, that the game the port is very solid as far as I can see, but I was unhappy to discover that as a console first title, it tends to be very limited in terms of the settings. It's not as bad as I expected, but I kind of wish, just like I have seen a lot of people, and I have been complaining myself, that just the settings screen is a little bit could be better in terms of the options that it shows. But it does come with some pretty neat things. So the game, as far as I have tested, and the game has been out for what, like 2 days. I have been it does it continues the trend of games using more VRAM that I'm personally comfortable with. Only last year I was often getting away with just playing things on a 2 gigabyte VRAM GPU, and once again this is becoming the year where that doesn't hold true, and it consumes as much VRAM as it can. But when you actually use any relatively modern, it tends to work pretty well. I have seen something as humble for mainstream standards as a GTX 1060 or an RX 580. GTX 1060 I mentioned because I haven't checked the Steam hardware survey in a while, but it tends to be the most common or one of the most common GPUs out there. And it does like fine for 1080p and 60 FPS in like medium settings, which is close enough to what you get on a PlayStation, and with double the frame rate that you will get on a PlayStation. Only having trouble like close to water or with certain reflection effects, but otherwise working way better than I expected, as long as you're in the latest drivers. When you start climbing up, some interesting things happen. I've actually had a chance, like the one advancement that the game has that I have mixed feelings about is DSLL. Did I get those right? The super sampling. Yeah. The Nvidia super sampling, because for those that require a little bit of context on that is a feature that basically renders the game at a lower resolution and reconstructs it using an AI algorithm. So it's only compatible with RTX GPUs, which is the part that I really dislike. Why? Because it's magical, especially in this game. Like if you throw it into the game and just use a higher resolution, most of my friends or me myself, I cannot see the difference. Like it works really well, and the performance impact, what you gain in performance is just impressive. Which is why it's at least frustrating to me that right now the cheapest thing that you can buy that supports this is an RTX 2060 or 2060 Super. Hopefully, as we move into Nvidia's next generation, we're going to see this feature more common around just Nvidia's lineup, and we can start getting some cheaper GPUs with this feature. But this is particular transformative for it. So I will expect, and I will not be surprised if people who have more advanced stuff from a RTX 2060 up are going to get a lot out of this game just based on that. And I was also very surprised to see that it has a mostly the frame rate is mostly unlocked. You can go all the way to 240 on the menu, which is, again, like for a game that seems designed to run in a 30 FPS console, the fact that it allows you to go that far, and it can in some GPUs at least get close to 100, is very, very impressive. On the lower end spectrum, something as humble as a 1050, which is, I think, the first thing that I tried, is okay for 30 FPS or get graphics that are lower than a PlayStation, but at least at 30 FPS, doable. It works. I didn't expect it was going to work due to the VRAM, and it can stutter sometimes due to the VRAM limitations of a 2 gigabyte 1050, but it works. It definitely works. What I'm now taking a closer look at, and I haven't done the research, but I'm looking into it, is integrated GPU performance, because so far stuff like a Vega 8 on an APU, on an AMD APU, for 30 to 40 FPS on lower resolution does fine, but the problem that I keep, well, two things. One, the game is very limited in terms of resolution options. The lowest resolution the game admits, it's 720. And even you can jump from like 720, 1080, and then like 1440p and 4K, and it's like 4 options. I think I have heard from people who have like bigger ultra widescreen monitors that there's a couple of widescreen options there. But it's again probably was programmed for a very specific set of resolutions for the console, so it's a bit sad. You can try. First thing I did was trying to force a lower resolution just on the configuration file. But this game does something that I haven't seen a PC game doing in a while, that I found particularly irritating. It checks the configuration file to have like a very specific set of values on it and just in a range. And if you don't, if you, for example, use a lower custom resolution, the game throws a warning that goes like, unauthorized value found in configuration file, loading defaults, and it loads something that is like hard-coded as a default inside the game, which is not... I have a philosophical difference. I have a philosophical complaint to any game to any PC game that has a configuration file that when you change something, it complains and like goes like, no, you can't do that, because I think it philosophically goes against what PC gaming is. But I have seen the game barely has been out for a couple of days, and I have already seen people in the modding scene experimenting with it. So I have high hopes that the modding scene is going to unlock a lot of the performance potential in this game in the future.
The most controversial thing I'm going to say is I hope the modders can make the game better. Some people love it.
For everyone.
It's a very polarizing game. The interesting thing I'm actually really looking forward to next month is that so this game was made on Guerrilla Games' Decima engine, and obviously this is a PlayStation exclusive for a while. And the next PlayStation exclusive for a while we're seeing go to PC is Horizon Zero Dawn, which was developed by Guerrilla Games and will also be on the Decima engine. So I'm curious for when we boot that up next month, it comes out in August on PC, whether that's going to run just as smoothly and be just as good of a port as Death Stranding was, and if it's going to have similar options.
I fully expect that to be the case. I will not be surprised at all. I will not be, so the existence of this game is interesting for PC gaming, because
Yes.
it's part of the longest, for the longest time, the exclusivity of certain titles developed or like published by Sony has been their biggest strength. But them publishing stuff like this is part of a larger trend of console makers not seeing PC as a competition, but rather a bit of as a complement, or something that they can just do a long tail sale of their existing games. So I will not be surprised if the fact that Death Stranding came to PC is part of just a larger effort to get some of their console engines working well on PC and just working from that base. So like I 80%, I expect the Horizon Zero port to have exactly the same options and the same limitations on the configuration file. The good news is that probably by that time, the modding community will have like a really good grasp of how this engine works, and will probably mean that the mods will start flowing faster.
Yeah, it's the really interesting thing. I mean, Xbox even today put out a statement, and they were talking about like how making the gamer the center and the gamer's the future of gaming, and how you can play your games anywhere, and you can play it in the cloud, or you can play it on Xbox One, or you can play it on Xbox Series X or your PC. With Sony, exclusives have been how they sell their systems. And they're already, I mean, honestly, saying that what Microsoft said is kind of a shot at Sony, because Sony has already announced a bunch of exclusives like Spider-Man Miles Morales. And so there's a question, are we going to see Spider-Man for PC? If so, how long is their lag time going to be to make sure that it sells off the systems first? So I agree. This is actually a pretty momentous thing to see two games in the same year, once exclusive to PlayStation, no longer being the case.
Yep. So now we've come to that part of our show where we take questions, or we make sure we take questions or comments from the audience. We haven't really gotten much on the backlog, but I wanted to invite anyone who's viewing or listening in real time as we're recording this, if there's anything they wanted to ask us about.
Can I, while those questions flow in, can I add a comment regarding the conversation that we're having about consoles?
Of course.
So something that interesting that happened, I don't know, a couple of hours ago, has been a weird day. But I think they finally confirmed that the Xbox Pass is going to include their xCloud streaming thing. So it's going to be like one monolithical service, which something that I'm very excited to see gaming moving forward is that finally, like, Microsoft is not trying to do the same thing, trying to compete with Sony on the same territory, which means Sony is the one company trying to do the thing that we have expected gaming companies to do, to make a console and to send games for that console and move forward. And even with that, with asterisks being some of the games releasing on PC, you always have Nintendo doing their own thing in their own Fantasyland. But now you have Microsoft doing something as weird as saying, hey, you don't need to buy our next console. We're going to make a lot of games that just are going to be like on PC. You're going to get a base experience on older consoles, and you're going to get a better experience if you spend more. Or maybe you can play them on the cloud and not buy a console at all. And if this works, if their subscription service tied to xCloud actually works, I think we might see some interesting movement of what gaming means and what people expect from gaming in the future. A lot of people, when I usually speak about this, and cloud gaming is a point of interest of mine that I always talk about, and rarely people share my enthusiasm. But people always say, oh, but what does that mean for PCs? Everything sort of cloud-based in the future. And ironically, I think the PC space is the one that is likely going to be less affected to the move to the cloud, probably consoles more, because, and this is what I take it back to Death Stranding, as these sort of ports are proving, at least to me, is that if for console manufacturers, PC is always is being seen as a separate thing, as they don't really even see it as a competition. So PC's enthusiasts are very particular about what sort of things they like, about how they want to play their games, and these sort of ports play to that. And cloud gaming is not going to change that. So it's probably going to be a more fragmented, but also very more interesting future moving forward for games coming to all platforms. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm more excited than having in a while.
Yeah, it actually sounds like a pretty solid deal. So they're saying no extra cost to add it to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. So that's Xbox Live Gold, Project xCloud, and whatever they decide to call it. The 100 or so games that work in the cloud, the entire library, and working on your phone, your tablet, your PC. Ultimate works on Xbox and PC, and your Xbox. It's a lot. And Microsoft is committing to publishing all of their own games day and date on PC. So now it's going just like one console and its exclusive games versus an ecosystem. And I agree with Alex, it's a big deal. I have slightly less, having played with Stadia a bunch, I have slightly less enthusiasm, but I do think pairing xCloud with Game Pass is a really smart move, because that just means the games you own in one place, you own them everywhere. And I think that's a pretty good idea.
Cool. Well, it looks like we didn't get any new questions from the audience, which is cool. We've actually had our largest viewership ever, but people are so excited by what we're saying, we've left them speechless. We've left most of them speechless. But it's been fantastic having you on, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you as always to Sharon, and thank you to Andrew. We are here on the Tom's Hardware Show every Thursday at 3 p.m. Streaming live every Thursday at 3 p.m. and thereafter available on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever, and as audio, wherever you get your audio podcasts. For Tom's Hardware, we'll just say, see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.